Hello everyone, my name's Alec Marsh. It's my great pleasure to be chairing the first panel of the Spears 500 Live 2023, which is on wealth management. Who have we got here? Well look, first of all we have Paul Aberley. Thank you very much, Paul. The Chief Executive of Charles Stanley since 2014. Next we have Mo Chukir, who is Chief Executive of SG Hambros. You've been in post since 2020, and previously he was CIO and Deputy CEO. And then in the far corner, let's not be pugilistic about this, we have David Tribe, the Chairman and Co-Founder of, David Scott, the Chairman and Co-Founder of Tribe Capital, and Managing Partner of Scott Capital Partners. Please, a round of applause for our eminent panel. So our topic this morning is consolidation, differentiation, and the future of wealth management. And we've got precisely 39 minutes to ace this. So without further ado, let's turn to consolidation. In the past 2 years, we've seen the tie-up of Tilney and Smith Williamson into Evelyn Partners. We've seen the acquisition of Charles Stanley and the recent deal that Rathbones has announced with Investec. So it would appear that consolidation is consolidating, as they say. Paul Aberley, you've had a front row seat on consolidation at Charles Stanley. What is your view on what's driving this momentum in the sector?
Well, I think really what's driving is simply operational gearing. You know, you can operate a partnership model, a small boutique, outsourcing various support services, and that works perfectly well, a very good model. But when you get to a certain size and begin to get a corporate structure, and you need a lot more in terms of regulatory backdrop and so forth, there's a sort of a fixed cost to having that platform. And as time goes on, that fixed cost rises. So the minimum amount of assets you're going to need, I think, gets ever higher year after year. And of course, the goal that you can reach for is the operational gearing. If you can put two firms together and use one platform, then the profit margin is going to be higher. So frankly, I think the real driving factor is to use operational gearing to boost the profit margin. That's what everyone has in mind when they're looking for M&A in this sector.
Okay, thank you. Mo Chukir from Hambros. What do you think is happening? Is consolidation inevitable in your part of the wealth management sector?
Yeah, well, good morning and great to be here on this panel. So I guess the short answer is not inevitable. I mean, every year at the beginning of the year, when you look at industry reports, they always talk about this is the year of consolidation. This is the year of consolidation. It's been a theme that has dominated, I guess, the industry, and not just this industry, every industry, because there are many players in a market, but I don't think it's inevitable because fundamentally you can still deliver value if you are small or if you are large. And the question is, really, what is your value proposition to clients? And just to use maybe a parallel, if you just think about other sort of segments, in terms of how customers like to shop for their groceries. Some people like the big supermarkets, some people like their local stores. As long as they're getting value, then they feel they will go to whether it's the big or the small institution in order to get what they need. And it's the same in the wealth management industry. So really the question really comes back to value proposition. You can achieve economies of scale if you are small, and ironically, you can fail to deliver economies of scale if you are large because your business model is not quite there. So I challenge the notion that it is inevitable, that large is better for clients. I'm not saying it's not, but it's very much around the value proposition that you deliver for your clients.
If I can jump in, I couldn't agree more. So I don't think the M&A trend is driven by can we improve the delivery for clients. I think it is very much shareholder driven rather than client focused. So I agree with that.
Okay, well, we don't like too much agreement, so let's turn to David Scott. When we spoke the other day, Dave, you talked about the squeeze middle in wealth management. And I get a sense that there's consolidation at the more mass affluent end, which is something that's been working in where you are. I mean, is the squeeze middle a big problem, do you think, David?
I think picking up on some of Mo's points, a lot of it is actually down to what your proposition is as a firm. And I think there's probably a number of firms that aren't really sure what their proposition is. Is it to be an asset manager? Is it to be a provider of financial advice and other services? And so I think that's the real conundrum for those people in the middle. I mean, if you're going to be an asset manager, and managing the money, then clearly size is of importance in terms of getting that operational efficiency. If it's just given individual advice and very personal advice, then obviously that's very hard to sort of scale on something that would sort of accord with a 40, 50, 60 billion pound firm. And I think it's the firms in the middle that have sort of got a bit caught up in sort of the pursuit of AUM and maybe lost focus on where they should be. And so those people are sort of thinking, well, where do I go? Do I become part of this consolidation, or do I sort of revert back to doing what I do? So I think for all the CEOs, having absolute clarity about what your proposition is and what niche, I suppose, market you're trying to serve is the key thing in terms of determining the firm's survival and prosperity.
Okay, so whenever there's an announcement of a big deal within wealth management, we're going to create a $100 million AUM behemoth, or we're going to get £1 billion worth of operational savings. Is there today, given the levels of cost of customer acquisition, the cost towards digitalization and things, and regulation, is there a kind of minimum AUM that, for example, Paul, a company Charles Stanley that talks to the sort of customers that you're talking to, is there an AUM you need in order to be profitable? And I'd be interested in the same question going to both of you as well.
Well, I think if you look at it from the client perspective, I don't think it is terribly scalable, because all of the clients, whether they've got £2 million or 200 million, they need a personal service, and they need to have trust in the person delivering that. So it's not that it's proven very hard to really scale up. And I think that's where the wealth fintechs have really fallen flat, because of the inability to get over that hurdle. So it's hard to industrialize at that client-facing level. But in terms of everything that sits behind, so for example, this year the consumer duty regulations that are coming in, having to evidence everything you're doing in that regard, that's a fixed cost. You've got to have the software in place to do all that. So I think that side of it, that is still steadily increasing, and that's where the minimums come in, because you've got a certain fixed cost for so much now in terms of the infrastructure that sits behind the client delivery. It's an increasing minimum that you need in a full service firm.
Okay, what is it then?
When I began at Charles Stanley in 2014, I was sort of looking over my shoulder thinking, and I stress, not a boutique, in a full service firm with all of the in-house backdrop, all the CAS, all being done in-house. With that style of firm, I thought, I'm not sure I'd want to be doing my job with less than 5 billion. Frankly, I wouldn't want to be doing that job with less than 10 billion, today.
Okay, Mo, 10 billion. Start
are we bidding? Look, it's a bit of a blunt tool to say that size is actually how you decide on scale. It goes back to the points I think we've all agreed on. I know you don't want too much agreement, but in essence, it's about the proposition. If you are only delivering asset management on a very specific niche market, you don't need to be big. You can deliver that and deliver that well, and the clients will come to you for that, and hopefully they'll get the service and the solution that they need. If you're a multi-service institution and you want to deliver that alongside banking, wealth planning, and any other type of services, then clearly that breadth requires a different size. So it isn't a one-size-fits-all in terms of scale, and if you're consolidating, to go back to that point, then the question has to come back to, what are we doing? Expanding our offer or deepening it?
Okay, and is there a number for your operation?
There isn't, unfortunately. It's not, because I think it's a blunt tool, personally.
Okay. David, any thoughts on the kind of quantities of money wealth managers need to have in order to make an honest wage in 2023?
I think you've got to split out the advice and the service compared to the actual sort of transaction and execution of investment management. And to me, they're very distinct services. A lot of firms have combined them into one, have always been one for some time. And that's been sort of the holy grail, to have that sort of complete unified offering. I think personally that in today's world, I would want my trading and execution to be with large, global players, where size is very, very important, and you need lots of assets under management to get that operational leverage. But I would sort of split out the advice bit completely separate from that. And on that basis, you don't need the big office, and you could probably get by with a couple £100 million, I think, very, very well. and still provide an excellent service to the clients that you've identified, and they are clear about what it is that you're trying to give to them.
Okay, so that's a very interesting couple of $100 million up to several billions. Okay, right, let's have a quick question on UBS and Credit Suisse. So obviously, in the last week, the merger has been finalised. Can I have a quick answer from each of you on how important this move is, the creation of a new behemoth in wealth management? Paul, you're closest, you're on the spot first. How is this serious news? Is this a game changer in the industry?
Well, I'd qualify my comments by stressing that my experience in recent times with Charles Stanley has been with clients in the UK, typically £1 to £3 million. So the mass affluent, the affluent UK segment. And I think having worked many years ago at Lombard Odier in Geneva, obviously the high net worth, the ultra high net worth is a totally different market. So I have to qualify my comments in that regard. But I'm not sure personally I see that as being a game changer. Clearly it came about by other forces. It had nothing to do with wealth management in a way. So in that sense, I'm not sure it really changes things. But I'm not the best placed person in the room really to address that.
So Mo, Paul's not sure it changes anything. Are we still going to talk about it in 10 years' time, do you think?
I think we will be talking about it because obviously it was a big event, right? The big market event. Will it have radically changed the course of the industry? Time will tell on that, but inevitably we do have some large players already in the industry. And okay, this makes yet another one, albeit two Swiss banks coming together. But for us, it's business as usual in a way. It's, again, focusing on our clients within our client segments and delivering value to them. That's really what matters. If we do that and do that well, then what happens elsewhere becomes less relevant.
Okay, so no news here for you. David, what do you think? How earth-shattering is that? Is it big news?
I think it's a complete non-event, actually.
Oh, come on.
On the basis that for the average client in the UK, they don't really care. It's not going to make any difference to them. UBS was a big player before. It's maybe slightly bigger now, maybe even twice the size. So what?
Fine. Okay, we've got 27 minutes left. Let's move on from Switzerland. Digitalization, along with AI and machine learning, all these other things that we read about every day. How transformative is technology and digitalization in your businesses and to the sector at large? And what are the repercussions of that? Massive question. David, I'm going to ask you to go first. So,
I think it'll affect it a bit. It'll be another form of investment. I've already, had various people coming to me with their own AI sort of, holy grail. Maybe again, having been around quite a long time, I've had a lot of holy grails presented to me on investment. I still haven't seen the realization of one, so I'm a bit skeptical. To me, it'll be another form of investing that people may decide to go for, like they've done with active and passive. In terms of, people being able to sort of interact, maybe, but maybe I'm a bit of a Luddite. But.
So for you, it's more of an investment opportunity. Mojike, presumably digitalization is having a big structural effect on your organization in the way that you talk and deal with customers.
Yeah. So I think just to add to the context, I think it will change things, and in some cases quite materially, but it's not something to be feared. And I just to put it out there, obviously there's a lot of talk about it right now, and we've seen the power of it. When you look at demos of what it can do, or if maybe some people have even interacted with its power, you can see it's got a lot of potential. But again, to just draw some analogies from the past and just think about the parallels here, is in essence, many years ago when we were getting around the world, it was taking us a very long time, getting on these ships and taking days to get from one place to another, comes this whole invention of a piece of metal with wings that can get us from A to B much quicker. That should have radically changed the shipping industry. But what has happened, actually, it's just made us more mobile, made us more productive. So that's just an example of something that does transform a certain industry, but creates productivity and new industries and new jobs and new ways of doing things. The thing I would say about AI, and really where the question is now, is not about how powerful is it, because we know it's very powerful. It's how do you create an environment where it can thrive. So again, to use an example, you can create a vehicle or a car that can drive really fast, but that's not going to be safe without some speed limits, some bumps, some traffic lights, some regulation. And that's really where the conversation is right now, is to say, this thing is here to stay. It has a lot of potential. Let's create an environment and frameworks where it can be done and used responsibly and safely.
Okay, now you've been at the helm since 2020,
Yeah.
and before that you're helping to obviously run the bank. To what degree has digitalization changed the job of the wealth manager working for you and changed the customer experience in that, let's say, 5-year span?
Yeah, it's been actually a huge positive tool and engagement with our clients. And just to give you an example, who remembers when you had to sit in front of, whether it's a client using a PowerPoint book, essentially flicking through page 1, page 2, page 3? That wasn't that long ago. That wasn't, at least I don't know what the experience is like in the room, but we all used to sit there and come in with the printed decks and sit there. Today, what we can do is we can sit there and actually visualize what wealth means for the client. We have a tool that allows us to sit with the client and say, look, what are your objectives? What is your starting point? How is that going to look over time? Forget the printed paper. Let's visualize. And we've got a tool, we call it AVA, that enables us to essentially go through that experience with the client and say, that's a path that feels good to me, or that's a path that I'm uncomfortable with. And so it's been a huge positive step in terms of engagement and knowledge for our clients, but also allows us to hopefully give better advice and better solutions as well.
Okay, so Paul, Charles Stanley, similar question about the journey of digitalization, but how is it transforming your institution, and where do you see that transformation going to, particularly with thinking with the role of the wealth manager, for example?
Well, I think there's an important bifurcation between the affluent, 1-3 million, and then obviously up to hundreds of millions, versus the mass affluent that might have £50,000. And the key thing here, and I think if I begin with the affluent, the wealthier segments, there's a real impediment to digital having a transformation effect there. And that is because if you are wealthy, if you're looking for someone to look after your wealth, two factors come into play. First, getting it right is hugely important. If you get the wrong wealth manager, it will have a huge effect on you and your family in years to come. A good one will have a big positive impact. The second factor is, unless you work in the sector, or at least in financial services, however bright and educated you are, you really don't have much of a clue of what these people actually do on a day-to-day basis. So you're making a buying decision which is hugely important, and one which you can't really comprehend. So how on earth do you deal with that? Well, you go back to evolutionary forces, which is you build trust. You find someone that you think you can trust. You build that trust very much face-to-face, because that's how humans evolved, to build trust and build security. And I see that on a daily basis, and I don't see that changing. And so as long as you need that interpersonal trust, that trusted advisor, someone that can be a dependable steward for you and your family's wealth, that's a person-to-person engagement. That constrains the degree in which technology can operate. So it can't replace that unless you believe that people will come to trust avatars or digital solutions. So instead, the digital side augments that personal relationship, which is something of a constraint. So I think of it in terms of having that investment manager with almost like a digital exoskeleton that can provide all of that digital enrichment to what remains a personal service. That's a challenge to investment managers, because they've got to get damn good at tech, and not all of them are. So there's a training element there. But I think it is very much augmenting the core service delivery. I contrast that with the mass affluent, because if you're putting 30,000 into your ISA, that's not necessarily a life-changing decision, and people at that level are much more willing to use online execution and so forth. So paradoxically, it's in that mass affluent level that you've seen the bigger moves in terms of the application of technology to the solutions, because those customers are happy operating with you in a digital way.
Okay, thank you. Well, look, so wealth manager, someone with a digital exoskeleton. Mo, let's talk about that. I mean, 10 years' time, do you think 15 years' time, the wealth manager, and there'll be a few of them in the room, how different will the job be? And do you think they'll be so critical, or will the firm have broadened its shoulders thanks to the impact of digitalization?
You pushed me from 10 years from now to 15 from now. I can't even tell you what's going to happen next year. But I think it's a good point. But maybe to take the question slightly differently is that with technology, we can do a lot, right? Technology is able and is very powerful to do a lot. And we as wealth managers can sit here and say, look, we can deliver all these things. We can give you literally a tool on your phone that allows you to look at all your wealth and transact and give you advice and. And that's, in our opinion, not the right way to run a business, because ultimately start with the clients and speak to them and say, what do you want? What do you prefer? How do you want to interact? And our clients tell us, we want tools, but we also want to interact with experts, with people. We want to have an ability to have a conversation with people that can help us and guide us through the whole experience. And I think that comes back to human preferences. It's the same in the medical industry. You can have all the tools and hook yourself up to all sorts of monitors and have some digital tools, but ultimately, if you really want that advice, you do want to interact with somebody that you can look in the eye and say, right, how can you help me through my situation? And I think that is here to stay. And this is where we start to see where digitization, it gives you the tools, but we get to a stage where we also want to detox from that a little bit and go back to our sort of more natural ways of interacting with each other as humans. And so that hybrid approach, I think, is very powerful, and that's what our clients tell us today. If in 15 years' time they tell us they want something different, then no doubt we'll need to respond.
Okay, David, last thought on that, please.
I'm probably not the expert to talk on digitization, but a lot of it seems to be about, accessing the value of your portfolio and doing some analysis or whatever, and that's fine for those who want to do that. A lot of clients don't want to. And if we just focus on the mass affluent as being the biggest percentage of the population, ultimately, I think it's probably the revenue model of the firms that are offering it is where the problem is, because for a lot of the mass affluent who have got credit cards and debt, the best advice they can get is to pay those off. But that doesn't tend to sort of provide any reward if your revenue model is based on AUM. So that, to me, is the fundamental problem, because where else could you get a guaranteed 24% return on your money? Well, by paying off your credit card. And that's, and there are some new players coming into that space whose revenue model is completely different. It's nothing linked to AUM. And I think some of those ones will be the big change, where people can get proper advice that is not linked to sort of having to invest more money.
Okay, look, we've got 17 minutes on the clock, which means we've got about 12 minutes till we're going to ask some questions. So please have some questions ready. David, you've led us on to an important topic of differentiation. Tribe Capital, your motto, one of your mottos is to change wealth management for good. Are these two guys, when you look at these two guys here, are they the same to you? They're just like, these two. How differentiated do you think the sector is as someone with a very firm differentiation?
In very general terms, I think the investment management industry has probably focused too much on, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, all the various investment jargon that we come up with, and has probably ignored the emotional part of people's wealth, that people should feel good about investing their money. People invest into art or classic cars, hope to get an increase in value, but also derive some pleasure from seeing that picture on the wall. So why should you not achieve, some emotional value from your portfolio? And I suppose that's what Tribe set out to do, was to say, look, you can still get investment returns, but if you can feel and believe and see that your money is investing in companies that are really trying to make a real change to the world, both in terms of the environment and society, then you get a much better feel-good factor. And I've always sort of felt that success would be achieved when 100% of your clients love being a client. And it's very hard for a lot of clients to love being a client of a wealth management firm, because it's a pretty dull experience. The only way you can really do that is for people to feel engaged with their money. And that's certainly something I've seen in my 40 years. The level of engagement that I have seen from the clients at Tribe compared to other firms has been on a completely different level. And it's quite incredible to see that sort of it coming alive and people feeling really engaged who never engaged with their money before.
I mean, that's one form of differentiation. Mo, what's your sense of customers' awareness of differentiation in the sector?
Yeah, I think the differentiation in our industry is really driven by levels of service. I think ultimately, whether it's asset management or loans or deposits and so on, clearly there is an element that one can differentiate, but fundamentally the client experience and the service that they receive is going to differentiate one wealth manager from another. And really at the heart of it is, have you had a good experience as a client? Are you getting answers to your questions in a timely manner? Are you getting solutions to some of your financial challenges in a way that you feel comfortable with? And that is, I know it sounds overly simplistic, but actually that's where really all of our value is driven in our industry towards our clients. And if we can do that well, then you can differentiate yourself. And again, there's many parallels if you, because I'm full of analogies today, it seems, but you draw the parallels of the airline industry. The airline industry are doing exactly the same thing. They're getting people onto planes from A to B, yet some succeed and some don't. They have a base, which is to be safe and to get clients from A to B to be safe, but the differentiation comes in the service, in the convenience, and all of those aspects that really add value towards the client experience, and it's the same in our industry. Ultimately, what we're offering at the base is hopefully sound and solid, but it's how we deliver it that matters.
Okay, Paul, how do you fill your 747s then?
Well, I would love to say that my own firm, is significantly differentiated from others in the sector, but frankly, it would be vanity to claim so, because I don't think, through the client's eyes, there is much differentiation in the sector, to be quite honest. If you take an analogy, if you got 10 football fans together and said, right, we want you to have a conversation about 10 Premiership teams. Are they the same? Are they different? 3 hours later, you'd have a rich conversation about the distinctions. If you got 10 clients of wealth managers of firms in this room, put them in a room and said, let's have a conversation about how Charles Stanley are different from Brewin or from Rathbone, they'd run out of things to say after 5 minutes. So, the harsh reality is, from the client's perspective, the differences between the firms are not readily observable. And because they're not observable, it's hard for them to differentiate. So I think clients have a tremendous loyalty to the firm. If you've been a client of Rathbone for 20 years, you'd be very loyal to Rathbone, probably think highly of them. But you could say the same for clients of other firms as well. So it's quite a difficult industry to differentiate yourself in today. That might change going forward, depending on the evolution of the industry.
Is that the sort of problem that keeps any of you awake at night, thinking my customers don't really know me from Tesco if I'm Sainsbury's? Is that,
It does. I don't think that concerns me. What does concern me is I think there's a lot of scope to improve the overall delivery of outcomes for wealth clients. I think there's a lot the industry could be doing better. But in terms of differentiation, I just have to, I accept that that's what it is. It will be an ego trip to think that clients do have this differentiated view of the sector.
But it's an area that you're looking at to work harder on? Is that goes without saying?
Well, commercially, one always wants to be able to improve the brand recognition, and we do a lot of work trying to build the brand, and we do a lot of measuring of brand recognition versus competitors. So it's something we try to do, and we are working hard to achieve that. But I'm realistic in terms of how far you can take that, given the peculiarities of the wealth sector.
Brilliant. Mo, can I have your response on that from your desk or remote desk at Client Hambros?
Yeah, I think the question here is, if you were to ask individuals to say, well, you want to have a private banking relationships, which private bank do you want to go with? I think ultimately what we find the experience is that a lot of people will ask around, will ask people they know and say, where have you had a good experience? What's it like? It's a big decision. It's a big decision for clients to engage with a private bank. And so this really comes back to, yes, important to get your brand out there, important to have and be recognized for certain elements of excellence, if you like. But fundamentally, word of mouth is very powerful in our industry as well. Okay. And I think that's really about service delivery. If you do a great job for your clients, then your business will succeed. Okay, we've got 10 minutes left, including questions, so we'll move on to the next topic, which is, let's talk about climate change quickly, and the degree to which the climate crisis and everything that goes with that is changing the industry
as you see it from behind when you're driving your desk. David, let's start with you. I mean, this is obviously central to what you do, but is there enough transformation going on in the industry? Is there transformation going on in the industry at large that you can see?
I think there's a lot of talk, and my fear is that the industry is very, very good at seeing trends and jumping on that and creating, advertising or marketing sort of campaigns around that. And, the sudden sort of surge in ESG funds, for example, was clearly just tapping into, a demand that was there from the clients. Yeah. And I suppose, fear or concern is sort of the lack of authenticity in this, and what does it actually really mean? And I think the narrative has probably got slightly confused over the last year or two. I think a lot of people would probably struggle to differentiate between sustainable, responsible impact investing, and it's got also an ESG. They're completely separate, different things. It has to be. We all have this sort of duty to protect our society and the environment. That's always sort of been there. There have been firms around for hundreds of years that have done that. It's not as if it's something new. It probably got lost in terms of the focus of the CEOs, but it is very, very important. And I think there are a lot of people in the middle ground who are not the extreme climate activists, but neither are they the extreme capitalists that will do anything to sort of, maximize their profit. And I think that middle ground is where I think there's a lot of opportunity to really direct the money.
Okay, Mo, let's turn to the middle ground, dare I say. How high on the agenda is climate change and sustainability with you?
Yeah, look, we're very public about our vision. Our vision is to be a leading responsible bank for client service and expertise. That's the statement, and what sits underneath it is what we call the 4 Cs, which are basically our clients, colleagues, community, and climate. So it's one of our objective, and really around climate is to reduce our carbon footprint. For our clients, it's about helping them and working with them to build sustainable legacies. For our colleagues, it's about building a culture that's rooted in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And for community, it's about making a positive impact. So I share that. It's on our website. It's public. We have committed to that. The key comes down to, okay, how does that translate in practice? What are the measurable KPIs that we're looking at every day, every week in order to achieve that? And I think some of those we take action on, and some of it is because of the collective action that's happening around these topics where you end up working towards that goal. So just to use climate as an example, is that we take specific action in reducing our own carbon footprint, whether it's through the real estate, whether it's through the kind of travel that we do, and so on and so forth. But some of our suppliers are already doing that. So the carbon footprint is also being reduced just by virtue of that. So I think it's a collective goal for all of us, and I think the industry is working towards that. But I think, as has been mentioned, it really comes back to clearer definitions of what that means in practice.
Let's just take one of those, if we may. So 100 trillion apparently is invested in funds aligned to the UN's, someone help me here, PRI?
Sustainable
Development Goals.
Yeah, so is that good enough? Not the 100 trillion, but having investments that much, simply aligned to that, is that actually, is there wiggle room, or is that, David, that's bloody marvellous, we want more of the same from your perspective?
The Sustainable Development Goals are a very good sort of measurement or sort of target to head towards. The reality is that probably virtually every company can claim some adherence or some alignment with any one of the SDGs, and therefore it's when the data is then being translated, is that really a material sort of difference, or is it just, there was one well-known mining company listed on the stock exchange that's one of the highest rated ESG companies. So I think you've got to be very, very careful with this data. There's $1 trillion in what, and certainly when looking at some of the data coming through, it leaves a bit to be desired, I think.
Okay, so there's some good cynicism there. Paul, back to the original question. How is the climate crisis and that impetus affecting your business?
So, well, we look at it in three ways. Firstly, there's the company's own carbon footprint, and obviously we're taking actions to address that. Second, there's all the preparations for regulatory reporting, because the FCA will want to know the carbon footprint of our clients' investments, so we've got to get all that ready. The third element, which is where we began, is enabling clients to invest according to their own preferences in this regard. And we spent a lot of money investing in portfolio construction systems which allow clients to be very specific. They may be more concerned about the S than the G and so forth. So we did an awful lot of that type of investment. But, you know, to be candid, we take it very much from the viewpoint, this is not our money, it's the client's money, and therefore we are at their service and we will invest it as they wish. So we ask them, we say when we meet with them, you know, to what extent do you want us to build these sort of factors in? And to be honest, the answer is not really. When I talk to clients, and again, we're talking £1 to £3 million UK affluent clients, you know, do they believe that climate change is real? You know, yes. Do they believe it's man-made? Yes, all this stuff. They're doing lots of green things in their own lives. They might be putting solar panels on the roof. But when you ask them about their investment portfolios, they say, no, thank you very much. And when you drill a little into that, I'm afraid among, if I can call it Middle England, there's a lot of skepticism about how intelligent the political and scientific response is towards net zero. They look at the net zero strategy and they think, actually, this looks complete nonsense, the way they're going about it. There's a problem to be solved, but the response is so staggeringly incompetent. Do I want my pension invested alongside that? No thanks, I'll sit that out.
Okay. Questions? Do we have any questions? I can keep going for hours, but if there's any more in the room. Right, well look, a question. I mean, the FT this morning described the London Stock Exchange as Europe's moribund market for listings. To what degree is the LSE and its lack of, you know, favourable reception internationally affecting your business? Is it having any effect at all, Paul?
Well, yes. I mean, certainly we have. Our client base has a home country bias. Some of that's logical because of their sterling liabilities. Some of it's more emotional. It doesn't matter which. You know, we have to reflect that home country bias. Being the clients of the type I've described, you know, they're not investing in hedge funds, private assets. They want liquid, tradable assets. So UK equities are a very important part for us, and therefore, ideally, you would see a more vibrant series of new listings to give us a better range of investments for those clients who want a UK bias, because it can look a little bit old-fashioned and tired at times when you read through it. Yeah.
Mo, is that the same for you?
So our investment approach is global in nature. So we basically seek opportunities wherever they are, and if they're in the UK, then we would invest accordingly, or if they're abroad, then we would do that. So we're very much global in the way that we approach things.
Okay, and David, at your level, I mean, do you think that London's lack of success as a market in that sense is affecting its attractiveness as a wealth manager for international money? Oh.
I don't actually. I mean, I think, like Mo said, you know, a lot of people are much more global in their thinking. You know, I haven't seen the FT article this morning, but I mean, you know, I think there was.
It was in passing. It was just in passing.
Oh, was it? Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't even a damning indictment.
One soda-making company decided not to list last week or whatever, and I'm sure there's one the week before. You know, I think it's just news for news' sake. One of the former speakers was just talking about, well, we've got to fill the newspaper, so let's call London Stock Exchange moribund. You know, I don't think so.
Okay, if we have any more questions, right? In that case, we've got about a minute and 3 seconds. Oh,
gentleman over there.
Yes, please, quickly, if you will.
Hi, good morning. Joe Hodgins, a lending expert. How much has the wealth management industry got to open its arms more to private assets? And how much will that filter down the different segments? Because it's more seen at the ultra-high side now. Will it come down to that mass affluent sector?
Brilliant. Okay, let's start with you, David.
I think it needs to open its arms a lot more. It is very, very constrained, obviously, for the mass affluent market, and, you know, rightly so to a certain extent. But, you know, just some of the qualifications to actually qualify to be able to invest into some of this stuff is very difficult. So I think there's probably change to some of the regulations to allow that to happen. But then you probably need maybe a little bit more protection and an education on liquidity, because obviously that's the biggest issue.
Thank you. Mo?
Yeah, I mean, I echo that. I think it's very much about risk profile and risk tolerance. I think that obviously there are many solutions out there, but it's about understanding the client's risk profile, and liquidity is going to be a key part of that.
Paul, I mean, it must be very difficult to provide these opportunities when you're dealing with a great number of clients.
Well, yes and no. No. Operationally, I think we could certainly manage it. You know, if the vehicles were there and the regulatory backdrop allowed it, then I think it's something we would welcome. I think there's great risk-return opportunities in private assets, but again, liquidity is the issue. And for many clients, in reality, many of them don't need liquidity. If we're managing their pension fund, in many cases, they've got no intention of drawing that down for 10, 15 years, so they don't need that liquidity. But whether the regulator's comfortable with them not having that is another matter. And of course, with the new consumer duty regulations coming through, foreseeable harm is a real concern for us now. So we have to be looking ahead to what might happen that the customers are not aware of today, and that again will, I think, increase the degree of conservatism with how we invest. So I'm not particularly optimistic on that, but the concept, I think, would be great if it could be made to work.
So we're back to compliance and get in touch with the regulator. Right, that is all we have time for. We're in the red on the clock. So please put your hands together for our panellists, Paul Aberley, Mocha Cheer and David Scott.